But now's your opportunity to ask questions of our panel. But I'm going to exercise the chair's prerogative here and put a question to the panel. And that is, throughout the professional career of absolutely everyone in this room, computers have served to enhance and encourage skill development. So we've had an incredible rise in educational attainment in Australia, and there's been a great benefit associated with that in terms of personal wealth. We're looking at talking about a future, though, where machines can potentially either eradicate jobs or dramatically reduce the demand for certain types of jobs, even highly skilled ones like doctors, as you've just mentioned. What advice would you give to a teenager just contemplating their future, having left high school? Phil?
I think, first of all, take charge of your working life rather than have it given to you, in the sense that you're working for somebody and you get surprised when you get the sack or the company goes broke. Don't ever allow that. I think from the time you start, you must first of all take charge of your own future, which means you're looking ahead rather than just taking each day as it comes. I think that's rule number one. I think number two, I think that we've got to face the fact that this coming generation, certainly the Generation Z, if you like, that are coming into the workforce another 10 years, are going to work for probably 55 years, maybe 60. So it's very likely that technology alone will mean that they will have many careers as one disappears because of technology or some other reason. So being prepared to have at least 5, 6 or 7 careers over that very long period is important. Bearing in mind that our long-distance forebears only worked for 25 years, so one job did in those days, and technology change was very slow. I think thirdly, the need for constant learning, and you've almost inferred that, I think so, as the two previous speakers. It's not a delete option to be continually learning and adjusting all the time. Whether that's, and online is going to help that a great deal, obviously, except for the tactile jobs. So yeah, I think take charge of your own life, be prepared for change, and you've got a very long life ahead of you.
Well, clearly getting educated is a thing. It's how you get educated. I think giving advice from one generation to the next is sort of a waste of time. I don't know if you've noticed. I don't think I did any of the things my father told me I should do. And here we are. And I notice my children pay no attention to me. I've just had a very violent argument with one of my children about enrolling in an MBA. And who would know about MBAs in the world? Well, let's think for a minute. Maybe me. No. So giving advice is difficult. What I hope for the next generation, what I hope for them is that they do benefit from the wealth base that they are about to be delivered. So with such extraordinarily generosity by all the generations before, particularly their great-grandparents and their grandparents before them who started the industrial age. I hope that they'll be inclusive. I would hope that they will think gently of the planet in ways that we did not. And my hope for them is that they don't see work as the be-all and end-all as we have done, that they do see that there is art and culture and other things that you can do. And if they waste all that, it'll be their own bloody fault.
So I say this as a passionate geek who'd rather be locked in a room doing mathematics on my own than dealing with people. Pay attention to people is my advice. Empathy is going to be the driving force of the workforce of the future. Dealing with other people is going to really distinguish us from the machines.
Thank you. Some interesting advice there. We have a question on the side of the room.
Austin Lee from City of Melbourne. Thank you for wonderful presentations, really interesting and inspiring. My question is about trust. We have, I think, over the years been outsourcing trust in various ways through people being educated and becoming experts. But the notion, I think, with technology and online that you can trust what you read on what is online and these MOOCs. And so I'm just wondering the extent to which we are outsourcing trust more rapidly, and how we can rely on what we read and what the so-called experts that are being educated through these online MOOCs and other sources, how we can ensure trust. Is it going to be a bit like the voting that you have for your service you get through Uber or through the online sort of accommodation? how do you actually know you can trust what you're getting? Thanks.
Can I start very partly with a bit of humour, but the Roy Morgan people do a survey of honesty and ethics usually every year, and at the bottom of the barrel are politicians, used car salesmen and journalists. Unfortunately, they did lift the politicians one year by introducing one new category called drug dealers, and that did lift the journalists up one slot. I think your point is well made, though, because I don't think there is a lot of faith in the media today, and there's much more ability to question whether it's right or wrong. I had an uncle long since dead and asked him when TV arrived in 1956 what he thought about it, and he didn't like it because he was born with newspapers and radio in his bloodstream, and he said it's the library for the illiterate. And I think to some extent you could apply that to almost all media today, and I don't lose all my media friends in the audience when I say that, but what I think is going to save the day, and Hugh can support this or not, I think the advance of what I used to call artificial intelligence, or whether it's cognitive software, is going to mean that something like that 99% of decisions which involve an opinion today will not. It'll be sorted out for you by the use of big data and very clever software. So I think even things like, is global warming caused by humans or not, instead of it taking 25 years to sort out with the scientists, and even longer for the public to accept it sometimes, I think it would probably take a fraction of a second to say yes or no. So I'm looking at that age of enlightenment here that you referred to. I really think that we are seeing the death of the old form of either knowledge or wisdom and the birth of a new one. Is that a fair comment?
I agree, and in fact, you know, you refer to Airbnb and Uber, the so-called wisdom of the crowd. The wisdom of the crowd originated from some British guy's name I can't remember, but he was a eugenicist. He believed that the working classes were genetically inferior to the aristocracy, and he found when he went and they were doing a thing at a fair where they were measuring the weight of the bull, and all these working class people were measuring the weight of the bull, and the average came out perfectly at the weight of the bull, or they were guessing it. So the wisdom of the crowd, which really is what you're referring to here, Phil, is absolutely the way in which you can create trust. But you've also got to create trust in institutions. And let me just finish by saying it will take me 1 microsecond to tell you climate change is anthropogenic. So thank you.
We have another question from over.
Call from Chorus Executive, and we're a talent management and recruitment agency, and I spend a lot of my days talking to senior people in HR and line management about how to get the right people into their teams. Part of it, of course, is skill and education experience, but a lot of it is the softer skills, so empathy, resilience, dealing with chaos, leadership, and how to negotiate and influence. And I haven't heard anything from what you've been saying from an education perspective around how are we teaching our young people how to talk to each other, how to influence each other, because my fear is with the education going offline and very, you know, where it's transmitted to you and you're absorbing, you're actually not debating, you're not listening, you're not having to negotiate or influence. So how are we going to bring those skills into our new world?
Work-integrated learning is one of the great drivers of the next generation, and in fact we're all vehemently agreeing about that as work and life merge together. Just because you're in the cloud doesn't mean you're talking. It just means you're talking not at 37 degrees but through a screen. And certainly a lot of the learning that in fact some of the people on the table you're at would be able to tell you are very good arguments and discussions, and within a millisecond the screen becomes an irrelevancy and people forget that they're in different cities or in a room somewhere else. And I think if I had to say one thing about the next generation, I think their capacity to have an opinion and to have an argument is our great hope, that they do understand that there is more to life than some of the linear things perhaps that previous generations have thought. I agree with you around influence and how you break in. Where I see the big barriers is the inclusivity barrier around those who are not part of in, And when you're not in, you're not in. And so the number of Indigenous people in the room is probably below 3%, if you wanted my brutal opinion. The number of women on boards of large corporates over 10 million is probably below 30%. And it's how we're going to break down some of those shibboleths that will matter. The capacity to communicate, I think, is genetic. It goes back to, you know, to Adam and Eve, or whoever it was that first climbed out of that tree, and we've got really good skills on that. The one thing you can rely on, I think, is, and if I put it at its most basic, sex, drugs and rock and roll, the 17 to 21-year-olds are going to meet each other, and there will be communication. It's just that they do it in a different way to you and me. When I was a girl, you picked up the phone or you hoped someone will phone you. These days, you send a text, and you usually do it on one of the phones you have in your pocket. What I notice is the under-25s carry 2 phones. I presume one's private and one's not. I'm not sure. But that communication is not the issue, and it's certainly not the issue in learning. The issue, I think, in our society is around how you include all of those who have capacity to contribute.
Thank you, Jane. Do you have a question?
Councillor Rod McDonald from the City of Greater Geelong. It's terrific to see Jane here from Deakin, and also the discussion around digital disruption. My question is around the internet. Obviously at this point in time, the amount of data that's flowing both up now as well as down is just a tiny fraction of what it will be in the next few years. My question is that back in 2010, say 5 years at least, smart cities were putting in 1 gigabyte systems. 4 years later, last year in Toronto, they put in a 10 gigabyte system for businesses, 1 gigabyte for private households. We've seen a ramping up. In Australia, we're aiming for the 1 gigabyte. Now we're sitting and looking at 25 megabytes with a 5 meg up as being a guarantee. How do we get through to our leaders the fact that this is changing and what's being built just won't cope with the future? It's a real bane. And for someone in our position in Geelong, we're really struggling just with the basic internet services.
So thank you for the question. Let me get something very clear about speeds. It's a bit like asking how fast your car can go by looking at the speedometer and seeing where it ends. The fact is that the way the internet works, at any particular point in time, you only need a certain amount of speed to cover the needs that are available to you at that time in terms of data supply. I actually once very modestly wrote a theorem called Bradlaugh's theorem about this particular thing. And there's a threshold in Bradlaugh's theorem which is the current requirement for internet speed. And today I can give you the chapter and verse behind it, but today that's of the order of about 30 megabits per second. With time, it's going to climb. I'm not someone who's saying that 30 megabits per second is enough for all time in the future. We clearly need to get up to higher speeds, but with time it's going to climb. But there are pathways that take you from where we are today to where we need to be in the future. And by making choices that are economically sound today does not mean we preclude the opportunity in the future.
The only thing that worries me, if I can add to that, is that we've now dropped out of the top 30 on internet capacity in the world, and my company, for one, feels that badly. I mean, to me, Australia really is just so far behind. It worries me a lot with my company. It's an online database company, and
so can I deal with a couple of things on that, Phil? I feel I've got to leap to our defence here, having worked in the telecommunications industry for the last 30 years. The fact is that those comparisons are done with highly dense, multi-dwelling unit countries, Korea, Holland, all these countries. We have the most dispersed urban environment in the world. The urban density of Melbourne is 1/7 Los Angeles, which we think as a big spread out city. And the simple economics of utilities tell you that the more spread out and the less dense the urban environment is, the greater the cost per unit of the utility. And the fact is that if we're 30th or first, it means nothing to me, because unless you're actually below that Bradlaugh threshold, it means nothing to you as an individual user.
true, we are below the...
we are below so Hugh, I just want to defend our great speaker over there. If you get on the train in Geelong, let me tell you there are 4 black spots. And we're, 45 minutes from Melbourne? And if you get to Lara, for anyone who lives in Lara, this came up, I was on the train this morning and it has no service. Lara is actually quite a dense community and it's 15 minutes from Melbourne.
Can you give me the details? I'll get our mobile engineering people to look at us.
Can I add to the fact that I live in East Melbourne, which is 1 kilometre from the GPO, haven't got any broadband available to my apartment. No, I think it's a serious problem. I think when we talk about infrastructure in Australia, and things like roads have been talked about where Hugh very rightly says we won't need them anyway, or to the extent that we think we will, but I think the most valuable infrastructure is to have a very effective national communication structure, and I just don't think we've got that at the moment, that's all.
That's the part I disagree with. That I think we do have a very effective national infrastructure. It's not perfect. I'm not claiming that everyone's getting the service they need, but if you take our mobile network, it's far and away superior to any other network you're likely to find anywhere in the world except perhaps Korea and Sweden. But there are no other countries that have a network that's 2.3 million square kilometres, 5.5 times the size of Britain, and can give you broadband everywhere you are. Now, there are black spots, I'm not denying them. We do constantly work to eliminate them, but we do have a very good infrastructure. I do debate that.
I can't use it in Port Douglas on holidays. I can't use it in Hobart. I can't use it in I can't use it anywhere. They just won't work.
I'll give you some lessons, Phil.
As a chair, it's always good when your panel has a robust discussion. I think in this case we've got the seeds of another event. There's probably time for one final question.
Paul Dowling from the City of Greater Dandenong. Very quick question. As we go down the journey towards utopia, focusing on STEM for all our students, how do we reconcile this with the current situation where I believe that of all our secondary students leaving secondary education, a majority of them have got very limited, if any, numeracy and literacy skills?
Yeah, I think that's the issue of the day, and for utopia, that's the one we need to fix. It's an interesting fact, if you go into regional Victoria, there's a 12 percentage point difference from regional Victoria to Melbourne in terms of retention rate at year 12. Now, that's not that people in the country are less interested or stupider. There's something else that's going on, why Melbourne has retention rates of 84% and the country has retention rates of in some cases, sub 65. We have got to fix that. The thing that absolutely annoys me is the way, as a society, we have shied away from IT. We see it as nerdy. Nerds are cool again, and maybe we are starting to get kids going back to school. We need to teach our primary school children to code. We need our primary kids to be numerate and to be literate before they get to high school. Achieving that, and I think that's the responsibility of the community as a whole. And then in secondary school, we have to encourage everybody to get to at least year 12 so they can get themselves some post-school skills and in order to get whatever the jobs of the future will be. And we all agree that while empathy will be the most important thing, in order to be empathic, to have emotional intelligence, to be influential, you must have confidence, and that comes from a knowledge base. Our children leaving school in the droves they do is not good for Australia. Our shirking of coding, which is a perfect gapping, it'll fix a gap for a while, will be a very good way for many of our people to be employed. But most people see coding as difficult. The number of young women who say maths is hard is nonsense. And there's something that we have to do as a community, and particularly as educators, I think, to encourage the communities to see the value of particularly IT. It is understanding how to use something beyond getting to Facebook. Getting to Facebook does not mean you're an IT user. How do you take it 2 steps further? How do you get year 7 children to design an app? I think that should be a national challenge, because once you've designed an app, you can pretty much understand what other things that you need to do. It's one of the significant problems for Australia in our region. We could end up the most uneducated in our region if we don't start paying attention.
Which is probably a very challenging point to finish our panel discussion. I'd like to invite Mr. Stephen Taylor to the stage to offer a vote of thanks, and he will be followed by CEDA's State Director, Michael Camilleri, to close proceedings.